All right, here we go. So today, reading another crazy article from Fortune. The title is "The Professor Says Don't Be Yourself in the Workplace, Actually. Here's Why Authenticity is Overrated." Already sounds crazy. What do you think, Miriam?
We keep seeing so much about bringing yourself to work, or at least I think, that's something that I believe in, bringing yourself to work and authenticity. And when you come from marginalized background, right? I think that leads to a lot of
Oh,
the
the imposter
imposter syndrome.
syndrome. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's real for sure in the workplace when you feel like you can't be yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's dig into some of the main points of this, in my opinion, wild article. Here's a quote. "Feeling authentic does not equate to being perceived as talented or competent to others." This author, Chamara Presumic, writes in his book, an excerpt of which was adapted for Harvard Business Review Online. Despite the subjective benefits of authenticity, being true to yourself does not translate into being better colleagues or leaders. So I'm curious about what they think authenticity means with that
Mm-hmm.
statement. It kind of seems like they're saying to be authentic is to be an asshole in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace. And subjective benefits of
Mm-hmm.
authenticity seems like a really weird one. I wish they would have expanded on that. Yeah. So basically, of course, in this article, they're trying to make it seem like it's a generational thing. They're saying that Gen Z doesn't have the soft skills to get through this. And it's like, weren't you guys just saying that we don't need soft skills and that soft skills are trash? And now in this article, they're like, you need to have the soft skills, the emotional intelligence to know when to shut up in the workplace.
I also think that they're stretching. You bring up a good point about like how are they defining authenticity? Because I think when we read the article, they talked about authenticity being oversharing or talking too much about yourself, which that is not authenticity, right? Authenticity is like what is true to who you are as a person, as a human. And I think about the workplace and how sterile it feels like sometimes, right? And I think what I mentioned, the thought after reading that article was the pendulum of how we see workforce trends and how it's, the professionalism to me feels very sterile, especially being someone from marginalized background, person of color, woman. But I think we were talking about how the workforce is very white male central, which in the United States, a lot of things are white male centric. So when we talk about authenticity to the non-white man, what does that look like? And some articles like this one are talking about that means oversharing, bringing too much of yourself at work. What did it say? Something about the right to share
Right to
yourself?
share was a wild line from this article.
Yeah, that
Don't
is
we all have the
crazy.
right to be ourselves without,
Mhm.
offending people in the workplace? For me, it seems pretty easy.
Mhm. I think that's a whole different conversation, and I think authenticity is not what. I mean, I haven't read the whole book that this person wrote, but based on this article, I think they're defining or seeing authenticity very differently than what I think of authenticity.
Yeah. One more thing, actually, two more things I'd like to point out about this article. It is very strange that they just say thought leaders without saying which thought leaders are agreeing with this topic,
Mhm.
right? Like, there's so much vagueness in the, I guess, data that they're attempting to use to back up this argument that authenticity isn't allowed in the workplace or should not be brought into the workplace, rather. I'm scrolling because, yeah, it just says empirical research. What empirical research? I'm looking at this article. I see no links to the empirical research. All I got was one journal article, and that's it. Also, mini leaders. Who are these mini leaders already asking?
Mhm. Tip Tips to our listeners when you are reading or encountering articles, even if they have fancy names next to them, right? So this person's from Colombia. Cool. Do your research. Dig a little bit. What's the background? What are they researching? What is this meta analysis that they did? Usually there's links provided at the bottom of articles, right?
Usually.
So if that's missing and if there's a lot of sweeping generalizations, many thought leaders, many empirical research, but you can't actually trace them, then we have to question the validity of them,
You have to question, did somebody pay for this article so that they could promote their book?
which is no shade, but likely, right? That's more of the norm that we're seeing in these social spaces now is that it's ad space because that's where people concentrate and congregate. So that makes sense. But I think for our podcast, when we're talking about burnout and work culture and bringing ourselves to work, because I do have a lot of arguments against what this article talks about, right? In terms of like how we bring ourselves to work. I think the sterile aspect of not being yourself at work is problematic and can lead to loss of identity and purpose and values, and it's that
Burnout.
separation that can be problematic.
Yeah, it's like it's they're like trying to make you have a different personality, right?
Let's make
That
you into
sounds
the
really
robot.
tiring.
Let's make
Yeah,
you into the robot that we actually want. We don't want you to have personality. Don't be yourself. Just be this moldable human being that can do the work that we want you to do. Don't share your thoughts. Don't share your opinions, feelings, emotions. Don't be human. Don't have anything happen to you ever because that's going to affect our bottom line. So, therefore, let's control how authentic you can be at work. No, sir, ma'am. They.
down.
Mm-mm.
All right, well, hey everybody. You're listening to Burnout Meets Thriving. We bring our organizational psych background, our lived experience, and hot takes about modern work culture here to you. We're your hosts, Farra and Miriam. You can think of us as your workplace revolution guides to building a career in a workplace.
Today, we're talking about the B word burnout. In case you were confused, we do a
Surprise.
lot of burnout talking here, and that's what a lot of our podcast and Farrah's work is about. And my work is around thriving, but it really is a spectrum, right? Because humans, we go through things. We're not robots. And I think that's a huge problem of the workforce, right? The fact that we don't treat humans as humans in the workforce. We want humans to be moldable, robotic, have no feelings, have no thoughts, have no things happening, not miss work days, not be tardy, not have stressors distracting you from work, right? So like it's so hard when you are human and that's your human experience. And so there's many ways that one can enter burnout states, right? And I think right now we're seeing a lot of burnout trends. I quote trends, but I think that burnout has been a thing for a long time. And I think right now, hot topic around burnout. So we're going to talk about it as well and give you all our 2 cents backed by what we studied and what we have lived and our perspective as well. So do I define it? Do you want me to define it? This
Sure,
is a
go ahead
long.
and define it. Some people don't know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about burnout. Yeah, I guess that's we can start with that.
And honestly,
Um,
that's the problem. People don't know
yeah,
how to identify the burnout, right? So, yeah,
yeah,
I'm going to give you a
yeah. So when we talk about burnout and when you look at what it means, burnout is a state of physical, emotional, mental exhaustion caused by prolonged or chronic stress, particularly in work or caregiving context. But I also hear it a lot in like passion projects or it's you're giving a lot
still
of
work.
yourself to something, right? So it can happen in passion, hobbies. It happens a lot at work because there's just so much capitalist drive to squeeze all the work out of humans and caregiving contexts. And you can see the trend, right? When you're focusing so much of your energy and personal resource into something that then you kind of become disconnected. Just some historical background. It first was formally described by psychologist Herbert Freudenberger in the 1970s and is now actually recognized by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. The 3 core dimensions of burnout are exhaustion, so feeling drained, depleted of energy, and unable to recover even with rest. Cynicism of depersonalization. I think that's the big one for me that stands out a lot is cynicism or depersonalization. developing a negative, detached, or callous attitude toward work or the people you serve, and finally, reduced efficiency or efficacy, feeling incompetent, unproductive, and doubting your abilities or accomplishments. I think the reduced efficacy is what happens when you're at the tail end, or when you
Yeah.
have been in a burned out state so long that at that point, like, you're struggling. Like, it's struggle bus at work, it's struggle bus at home, on a personal level, like feeling depleted and not being able to regain your energy, I think is a clear sign of, it's not just being tired or stressed, right? It's a deeper erosion of engagement and meaning that makes everything feel harder and less worthwhile. So this episode is going to get pretty personal for both of us because both of us have gone through our own little burnout. I say little, mine wasn't very little.
No, it was not.
Well, we'll get to share some stories, because I think that also led, at least on my end, I wanted to study it a little more. I wanted to understand it because I was just deep in it, and it really changed my life. And so we'll be getting into that.
Yeah. Personally, I started experiencing burnout in college. Yeah. So even students, especially students, actually,
Especially,
can,
yeah.
yeah, because they have the school, they have the activities. And
Mhm.
like me, you probably also had a part time job, right? So you have all these things. But yeah, I just wanted to address that we see it at every level, right?
Mhm.
We can even see it in elementary school kids because I know I did when I was an elementary school teacher, which is kind of sad. But
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's something we've lived clearly. We have some experience about it. And once you understand the connection between the low psychological safety and chronic stress, it really completely changes how you see burnout, how you notice it in yourself and other people.
Mhm.
It changes how you view your mind and how it works, how you're talking to yourself, how you view your body. Do you have a random ache that you can't explain? Do you have an itchy patch on your skin, right? And ultimately, your overall situation in life will probably change once you realize uh, whether or not your burnout is related to work, your life, a combination of it all. It's just honestly life changing when you can start pinpointing the things that indicate whether or not you're falling into burnout or deep in the trenches.
Mhm. Totally. I think I can recall from my personal experience the moments of when I couldn't stop feeling tired and stressed out, when there was no off button, and it was regardless of what I did, right? I will acknowledge poor boundaries on my end, right? So back in the day and when it started, but these poor boundaries on my end are exploited by employers and rewarded with promotions, and pretty much if you're well on your way of burning yourself out, you're likely going to be rewarded. So we kind of live in this fucked up system, right? Because the poor boundaries were me working late, me putting the work, my job, before my own needs, which is problematic. But again, it's almost welcomed, very likely required from your job, right? And I think in some of 2 episodes ago, we talked about like what are the things that you can ask in the interview so that you can find out like what are some of these expectations, because this behavior is almost widely accepted, right? Working more than 40 hours a week, being on, being available at night, being available whenever. That is when I recall now how you were saying of like there's signs, and once you actually understand and see it, burnout as a concept, and then see it burn out in yourself, you can see, hey, I was actually playing into that. But at the same time, I also felt like that's what I needed to do to reach my goals in a career, to move up the ladder, to get a promotion, to get a raise. It was almost as if you have to do those things in order to achieve your career milestones, which is super backwards, right?
Yeah.
Because so problematic to then get to the point where someone's burnt out, and then what? The fallout is not very fun, and there will always be a fallout. I think we forget, right?
What goes up must come down, that's for sure. And
Physics, y'all.
yeah, it's everywhere. Yeah. Honestly, it kind of sounds like your pursuits in the capitalist system required you to be open to being exploited, right? Or like being, kind of, I'd say programmed or taught or learned, in ways, which is how they teach all of us really this country, to be honest. Like, if
Yeah.
you want that paper, you better chase it and you better be willing to do whatever it is, even if it's not being authentic in the workplace.
I mean, that's especially why they don't want us to be authentic, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're authentic to the point where you know yourself, know your values, have boundaries, and can do something about it, and can draw a line in the sand, then we're not helpful for them. Then we're not helpful for the bottom line and for these organizations, which is fucked. And that's why we are leading the workplace revolution here, because that's not okay. And humanity should be brought to work because, I mean, I believe that we should not burn out employees. And I remember when I was getting to leadership positions where employees would very candidly tell me how burned out they were feeling because of our lack of resources or because of our tight time frames. And at the same time, I was feeling it too, but then not being able to do really anything about it because the organization has a mind of its own. Organizational culture, when we talk about, how things are done at a certain place, we had timeframes and deadlines and expectations that we couldn't do anything about. And it was very weird how I finally started realizing that I was becoming complicit to that exploitation as a leader of a team. And then that made me feel so uncomfortable. So not only was I feeling it, that was already after my own. I did several years where I think that I pushed my burnout and was burnt out, but like a functional burnout, how what we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. We talk about
Literacy.
functional literacy. I've heard I'm functionally depressed, I'm functionally
Yeah.
anxious. I was functionally burnt out for a very long time. And it wasn't until, I think I reached probably at that point, 4 or 5, and this was also COVID. I think we forgot that we went through a giant global pandemic that a lot of people didn't really process. And so I think that's another reason why there's burnout everywhere, just because that was so much. And I don't know if we collectively, and the workforce especially, ever stopped to really like see like what the fuck happened and then process things and come out of it in a healthier way, unless you did something like me where I decided to walk away because it was just a little too much. It just, that environment that I was in was so conducive to burnout workloads. And so this is, when we're talking about this, we're unpacking how burnout is not just workload. It's about workplace conditions. And so the hope is, in our conversation today that you get to learn what workplace conditions can lead to burnout, for you to be able to identify them in your environment, and then for yourself to be able to draw those boundaries and for us to be able to empower you to draw those boundaries so that the capitalist system will try to exploit. So it's up to us in this case to try and draw that line in the sand as much as possible.
I would argue that capitalism doesn't run without exploitation, but that's a whole other episode. So let's roll into our next segment, in the trenches. Today we're going to talk about how safety affects stress. So as you know, like, stress is in our mind, stress is in our body. Uh, when psychological safety is low, your brain doesn't feel safe. And I don't know if people know this, but your brain can feel inflamed, right? Like, you can have inflammation in your brain in so many different kinds of ways. But this will trigger your fight or flight or fawn system, which is like an amygdala reaction that's like in your, I'll use a big word, limbic cortex. This is basically our emotional center in our brains, right? So this goes into overdrive, and the stress hormones like cortisol, they spike, and things like having a chronic illness flare-ups occur, and you start having migraines all the time, and you have these unexplained tummy aches. Like, all of that is happening when psychological safety is very low. Your nervous system is basically just participating in a triathlon that it never signed up for, maybe even an ultra marathon that it never signed up for. Because I just found out those years ago. Yeah, people running for like 3, 4 days. It's crazy. The whole
Wow.
team behind them. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, stress. It
Yeah.
affects our mind and our bodies.
I think what's coming up to me as you said that what stands out is nervous system, right? I think a lot of things that I am reading now and more involved with now is the acknowledgement of a nervous system.
Yeah, you got a body, remember that. Yeah.
And I'm laughing because we learn it in school. You know, if you're lucky enough to have gotten a good education, you may have, you know, learned it in science classes, how your nervous system works. In college, maybe. But, college education is very variable. Especially now, I keep, hearing nervous system, and we're becoming way more versed in talking about it and acknowledging it.
Like
And
awareness is heightened around it now.
yeah, and Farah, I'm gonna call out your expertise here of the neuroscience of it, right? Because that's kind of what it is, understanding the neuroscience of our bodies, of how the brain is the control system of our bodies for the most part, right? How does it link? And the nervous system, how many of us really understand it, right? Unless you studied it to that neuroscience level to understand the implications, to understand kind of how it plays out in real life, right? And I think what I find very interesting, I love this stuff too. I get really nerdy about it. I like the psychological neuroscience behind it is seeing that mind body connection with work. And I think, earlier I said the sterile professionalism aspect wants us to be robots. Robots don't have nervous systems. We can't do anything about that, right? So it's just super valid that we're talking about it, but we have to, and I think my goal for this segment or this part would be that you understand that, right? That our listeners are understanding how that plays out on a personal level and how, like, all bodies are also different. So nervous system reactions will be different. With our personal experience, I can share. Earlier, when you were saying, do you have a tummy ache? Do you have a migraine? Do you have a rash? Were you talking about me, Farah?
No, I've also experienced those
Because
things, actually.
because I had all those, and I think those are the things that our bodies, our nervous systems, they will tell us, they have signals for us. Our body has to maintain homeostasis, another big word maybe. Let's go back to our early education of homeostasis in the body. Our body will try to maintain balance. That's just like the simple way of of explaining that, right? That our body will try to maintain balance and health. And when our body cannot maintain balance or health, things will signal, usually through the immune system. And I have a chronic condition of eczema. And when I was in my very stressed burnout states, I was just sharing the story of how I would get a lot of flares and I ignored a lot of them. So initially, I would get a little patch here, a little patch there. I would see them. And for eczema, there's like a cycle and it's a trigger. It's stress, poor sleep. It's just a whole big thing, but that's a body signal, right? My body was telling me something ain't right. I'm trying to warn you something ain't right. And instead of actually addressing it and taking care of it myself, that's why I'm saying that I was part of it. But I do think that I was being rewarded for behaving in this way back in the day. Me having to walk away was me having to take care of myself. I've actually not had a flare ever since I walked away from the workforce, which is very telling, right? And so that's me developing a closer relationship with my nervous system, and it took therapy and understanding it on a different level to say, hey, these are signals of your body's not okay. Migraines, headache, your body is trying to tell you something. And so that's something that, I think the workforce, when we talk about burnout, is framed as a personal failure, right? Like, oh, you can't handle it. You're weak. You should be able to handle all of that. Oh, you
You
have
have the
like
grit.
the grit. That's a good one. Yeah. And then organizations will then try to say, like EAP, the employee wellness system or program, if they have one. Try yoga. Try to be more resilient. Better time management, So it's very much like, what can you do to fix your burnout instead of recognizing environmental work conditions that are exploitative, that are almost ingrained in the process and the functioning, the culture, the workplace culture. That's what I was saying earlier, where despite what I was trying with my team and the reports of burnt out, low resources, tight time frames, and even though I wanted to do stuff about it, I couldn't because the environment around me was like, nope, we have strategy, we have KPIs, we have whatever, whatever. That's way more important for the business than for the humans that are actually doing the work.
Sounds like
Not
burnout
then.
culture to me.
It totally was. Mhm.
Normalized that is too, here
Mhm.
specifically in this country of the United States.
Yeah. And
Because I
it's
can only speak for working in the United States because that's the only place I've ever worked.
yeah. But if we have international listeners, we would love to hear from you and say if this is something that resonates, or maybe we can learn from you about better workplace conditions that we can borrow and learn from, because it really sucks that it's framed as a personal failure. I think I went through feeling like a personal failure when I had to walk away or when I had to step down, or really, I mean, I chose a different career because of the burnout culture that I couldn't do anything about. And really needing to acknowledge that like my body was trying to tell me something, right? That these are chronic things that like they're signals your body is signaling, and it's trying to tell you. It's when we think about our body being primed for, hunting, gathering lions, and that rhetoric that we hear about how we survived, those stress signals is how our bodies are designed. And so now, like, when our body takes in those stress signals, which we interpret as danger, so for example, for me, danger would be I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to have money. I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. I'm going to lose my housing. I'm not going to be able to pay, like, feed myself. So back in the day when we had to hunt and gather things, and those were the threat signals, that's how our bodies were designed. But we have the same body that hasn't really evolved for these unreasonable deadlines, 2 weeks to complete a whole program of something that's supposed to train 3,000 people. Like, that's wild.
How does that sound realistic to anybody ever?
Or being on and, like being expected to answer emails overnight after 5 o'clock, no breaks, right? Or it's really interesting how our brains and our bodies then start to interpret these modern day problems as threat signals. We're in danger, right? And then our stress system goes into hyperdrive, and then we're just hyper vigilant. And when you're in a prolonged state like that, your body will tell you. And so I think the next step from here and from you hearing this is, what is your body trying to tell you, and are you listening to it or are you ignoring it?
I'm gonna wager they're ignoring because I don't know about you, but I don't think I was ever really told to pay attention to your body when it comes to how you're feeling about a situation until I went to therapy. And it was like, I'm trying to think, in undergrad, really, there was more so more information about how the mind and body were separate as opposed to thinking of them as one unit.
Mhm.
I get doctor's appointments in high school. I'd be like, oh, I have a tummy ache, blah, blah, blah. They run tests. We can't find anything. It must be all in your head, right? So they're saying that. But then we get into the workplace and it's kind of like, just get over it in your mind. Like your body will be fine, right? But we
Mhm.
acknowledge it in certain spaces that sometimes your mind can let you know through your body because your nervous system, you know, brain and body connects it together, will let you know that something is wrong. And
Mhm.
ultimately something was very
Mhm.
wrong.
Mhm.
And stress, like we said, that's the thing that kicks off that whole process of it all.
Mhm.
Mm. So let's roll into our next segment. Let's consult the research. As consultants, as coaches, that's what we do, right? We consult the research
Yes,
before we make
ma'am.
any big decisions. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the current research. So researchers Evangelia Dimitriotti and Arnold B. Baker. This is their study on burnout research and the ways that it can advance the field, right? So this is a workplace specific distinction from depression, burnout, which I wish that was more known out there in the world because a lot of people think that they have depression when really it's just a burnout issue,
Mhm.
right? And language around burnout and depression are often coupled together in media, so it kind of makes sense why people think of it in that way. but it is kind of dangerous to do that because they are two completely different things and they are catalyzed by different, events and effects and things that happen in your life, right? Situations. So some of the key points are that burnout, it does have multiple definitions right now. And so there's that's why we have this conceptual confusion. And we're hoping that since the World Health Organization is starting to recognize burnout as an actual occupational phenomena and not like an individualized issue, like possibly depression. Hopefully we will soon to see like some occupational safety nets put into place for this. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? But burnout is 100% an occupational disease in this context. So let's talk about the differences between burnout and depression. It is distinguishable. I don't really care what anybody says. So, burnout, context specific, it's marked by exhaustion and mental distancing. So, you are tired for no reason. You slept most of the night, right? You go to work and you're just not in it. You're not there. You're outside of your body. There's this like depersonalization that's happening inside of you, which is when you don't feel like you were inside of yourself, for those who don't know what that means. And that's wild, right? Like you're sitting in this office because there's all these RTO policies and you're just floating
Mhm.
and going through the motions. Like that is burnout. Now, the difference depression is broader, right? It's not necessarily work related, it's not work bound, right? This involves like a lower arousal threshold. So you don't really have to be extremely exhausted to meet depression standards because there's like a little rubric, right? We've both been to therapy, we know, right?
Mhm.
So here's some predictors from like a job demands resource theory perspective. So what's your workload looking like, right? Is there ambiguity in your role? Do you work in engineering? And now you need to work in
Barna?
customer service. I was trying not to say it.
Sorry, Barna,
No,
but
I can't
you
help it.
you did it. What we can't do anything about you doing it.
I
They
cannot. Like,
changed a job role for a specialty.
I go from engineering to customer service and then be upset that the engineers don't know customer service.
Mhm.
Anyways, are there emotional demands to this job? And this, it shows up across the board, but mostly I would say in like women who are managers or leaders in organizations, they not only have to do their role, but sometimes they have to do like the caretaking in the office place, like they're planning the events, like, oh, we need to get our happy hour together. Miss so and so is doing that, right?
Mhm.
Or we need to, you know, boost up company morale, but we don't have an HR department, so we're just gonna pick some
Mhm.
some random woman department head to do it. And I'm not
Mhm.
speaking from experience at all with that one.
Sarcasm. Am I hearing that you were chosen to do a lot of in-office activities?
Oh, not me, but my like
Mm.
superior, because she wasn't that. My supervisor
Mhm.
was definitely subjected to that. Even though we had our thing or whatever, I definitely saw that she had more emotional demands than the male directors
Mhm.
who worked at that particular location. It can't help but to have an impact on you, right? Whether it shows
Yeah.
up at work or at home.
Mhm.
All that leads to exhaustion. Lack of job resources. So, resources isn't just like, oh, did they send me a laptop for my remote job? That's also like, can I talk to my supervisor about something that's going on? Right? Uh,
Mhm.
are you not being micromanaged? Do you have autonomy to do your work as you see it fit? There are developmental opportunities which are shrinking every single day in these organizations.
Mhm.
Every time I read something, they're like, "Oh, we're trying to do this," but also companies don't want to invest in training. I'm like,
Mhm.
how's that gonna happen?
Nonsense.
It's
Not gonna
wild.
work.
It's
Mhm.
so wild. It's like
Mhm.
the research is there. They all know this, right?
Mhm.
And yet they decide to go against it.
I have to wonder sometimes if they do know this. And going into my master's in organizational leadership and I'm curious, you have a master's in industrial and organizational psychology. There are fields of study for organizations and humans at work. And so I have to wonder, do these companies, do these organizations really not know? Are they choosing not to know? I do think there's a level of the design is there where we're so used to it that we don't question it. That's kind of like conditioning that I think capitalism and indoctrination, and we talked about it at school, right? Even in college, we go through these insane burnout periods that I'm not sure that I talked or learned about burnout in college, but fuck. Pardon my French. When I'm thinking back to my first eczema flare, it was in college. And I'm thinking back to how insane, like those finals weeks were. And I'm a sociologist from that discipline from training. Remember a professor saying how our education sometimes
It
is
is.
indoctrination to the
Yeah.
overculture. And when we think about what the overculture is, being this capitalist society that we live in, that's almost it's by design, right?
Mhm.
So like I do have to wonder if sometimes these organizations, maybe I'm being more kind in giving them the benefit of the doubt. Other times you will find a not kind of Miriam where I really want to hold these organizational companies accountable for how they treat humans because if you don't know, okay, you don't know, but you can learn and you can apply. And you can hire people like Farah and myself who are consultants and coaches for organizations and people because we want to create better workspaces so that humans don't burn out and they can actually produce, work for society because we're supposed to be contributing members of society, right? That's what we grow up to be. But then we live in the system that completely exploits and designs systems that is just churning humans within the workforce. So it's very gnarly to hear everything that you're saying about like this research study.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. Some people just don't know. Like oftentimes, at least in like the master's degree circles, like the MBAs, definitely don't know what we're talking about over here. And sometimes I don't know what they're talking about over there. You know, so I get it. And
Mhm.
sometimes I don't. I'm like, what? Why does
Yeah,
that matter? And then they tell
yeah.
me, and I'm like, okay, I guess that seems very short sighted, honestly, but it is what it is. Because we're trained to see long term, and they're trained to see quarterly
Mhm.
profits, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with you. And also, that was a good call out because I am technically an interdisciplinarian, right? So like
Mhm.
my thing is to marry disciplines together and
Mhm.
think of the world in a holistic way as opposed to incremental things like industry
Mhm.
or math. And then also English is over here when like they are combined, they go together. All of this goes together because if it didn't, it wouldn't be a part of our collective society, right?
Mhm.
Just
It's
wild.
interesting when you bring up that interdisciplinary aspect. I worked within multidisciplinary teams for a very long time. And so it is a really special skill set, I think, to be able to understand, for example, in my arena, I worked with mental health providers and then medical providers, and then within the medical space, learn so much about the different specialties and the different types, and they all speak different languages. And then you're working with substance use specialist, and then we're working with generalist, and these are all very different disciplines, different specialties, different skill sets. And there are people like us, like Farah mentioned interdisciplinary, mentioned multidisciplinary, that are trying to connect those, that are trying to have those work together. That's life, right? And some industries you will have, we only do this, but for the most part, there's a lot of diversity and generalization in other companies. And that is those are the companies that I think would really benefit from having some type of consultant or coaching that looks at the psychological aspect of their humans at work. Because I'm not sure if MBAs may be having a class on like maybe just one single class that they had to take, or maybe it was an elective if they were lucky
One
that we
business
actually
psychology class.
just one. Instead of, our my whole, organizational leadership for me was really looking at the entire organization and how can we make you a leader. meaning, like how can we look at your process, your system, your culture, your people, to make it a functional place so that you are a leader in your organization, in your field, in your industry. But you're looking at a lot of those connections and you're making a lot of those linkages, which I think in my space, in LA, in the nonprofit space, unfortunately was very underutilized, you know?
And a part of me feels like often, the skill sets that we have managing these disciplines are underutilized. One, because the system is designed that way. And two, because the leaders above us don't even know that that is possible.
Mhm.
And that's why coaching is important for leaders,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Do you think that football players would be able to win the game without a coach? Let's just think about that. Do we think any sports player, I just met someone in my this weekend, a tennis coaching consultant, and they consult with tennis players because they're trying to make it into, the big leagues, and so they need coaching and consulting. And so I think some organizations, how many of us have heard we've always done it this way? We are innovating and moving fast in this world. AI is changing so fast and changing everything that we do need more consultants and coaching to look at the organizational system so that we can better shift and change. Like change is ever, it's what do we know that the only thing that is constant is change. And so if we know if everything is ever changing, we need folks within organizations who actually look at how changes are happening within the workforce and rolling that out across the workforce, right? I think one of the problems that also leads to burnout is the gap of communication with change, right? And I think right now we're seeing so much of it as like an explosion because of the AI changes, which on a very extreme level is when we see layoffs or when we see what's happening at Klarna, right? When they're like repurposing their human resources into doing different things. But if you actually had specialists like us who are looking at your organization and going through change management to really take into account your people, your people managers, your chief people officer, they're supposed to be looking, right? Supposed to be looking at how organizational things are affecting your people, right? Because we're supposed to care. I
Yeah.
give For those of you who can't see me, I'm doing air quotes because they're supposed to care. And so because we're expecting, or at least, there's a level of expecting the workforce to do that, if which in my experience they were not providing it, then we ourselves have to equip ourselves with that knowledge and information and then speak up about it if we can, or draw a line in the sand for ourselves because I don't know, at the end of the day, I know that we need a paycheck, but I don't want to sell my soul for something like that. And I'm really grateful for having learned about all of this because now I can be more equipped and empowered to make my own choices and decisions for where I want to work and what environment I want to work so that I not burn out.
Ooh, you sound so empowered. I love that.
Hard work, hard work. It did not happen overnight.
That's right, listeners. It does not happen
It
overnight.
does
So
not.
do
Mm-mm.
not put that pressure on yourself thinking that you're going to listen to these podcasts and it's just going to, tomorrow, I'm going to recognize every single sign of burnout in my life. And that's just not how it works.
Nope. It's really hard actually, and I think that's the hard part where
Yeah.
people, we want things to be easy and change is hard and change is a commitment and it requires doing really, really big changes and acknowledgement of where you are and there's a lot of self-reflection and hard decisions to make. But I think that's at the end of the day when we think about like burnout and if you are experiencing those things that we mentioned about like disconnection, dissociation, if you're floating, if you're having health issues, if your body is in constant hyperdrive, that's no way of living. No way of living. And if you're hearing those and you're hearing, yes, that's me, first of all, you're not alone. And second of all, you can get out of it. It's not easy, but hopefully, essentially, our union of Farah and I is wanting to create solutions for this.
So the current research is usually just like surveys and stuff. I'm guilty of it. I did a survey design for my final project. But we definitely need more longitudinal studies and experimental interventions, like actually implementing change management that actually addresses the problems instead of just addressing the technology that's being integrated into the organization.
For anyone who doesn't know what longitudinal is, just in
long
case.
term
Yeah,
long term
since we're
studies over a long 10
yeah,
years, 10
yeah.
plus, we
Mhm.
need that so that we can come up with these experimental interventions. But I got some ideas now if anybody wants to come to me about
Mhm.
it. But
Mhm.
since we have all this research coming in, we have this recognition from the WHO, I feel hopeful that in the future we will have more innovative methodologies that address these issues in the workplace in a holistic way as opposed to just one thing for everybody kind of way, right? Like it's not a one size fits all. And that's why we need more of the research, right?
Mhm.
So you just learned that burnout and depression are completely different from each other. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And if not, you can rewind this if you want and listen to it again.
Mhm.
Yeah. Moving on to the next segment. Find the pattern. Oh, today we're going to talk about workplace patterns.
We've alluded to some of those already, right? We, I think, have sprinkled many examples across this episode already. In this segment, and it is, I think, Farah and I both have strong skills in pattern recognition. There is a pattern to these things, right? There are tells, and these are the things that we want to share for y'all because that's where that empowerment comes in. I think when we expect the workforce to do something, the organization, the company, the leader, we're seeing that they're not doing, right? Like we're at the point where we have to accept that we're kind of on our own, and so we have to self-equip ourselves with these things. And so let's review a few common signs of things for you to look out for that we've discussed in different episodes or that we mentioned today that you may be deep in burnout culture already. Either your environment might be experiencing this or you yourself, Sometimes you may be going through something with your own life. If you're a caregiver, we mentioned, if you're going through really big life changes, there might be other burnout things that are happening. But if your work environment is also not welcoming of it, it's not going to help your burnout, right? The last thing that you need is I have a parent who has an ailment, illness, or I have a child who has an illness, and then you go to work and they don't care. Like that's just going to be a thing where your burnout state is going to be amplified by the fact that your employer doesn't care about your situation. And that's where they're forgetting about that humanity. But some other things that are tells of this, the work hard, play hard rhetoric. If you're hearing a lot of, we put in a lot of hours, working around the clock, like it's almost kind of like
Ooh, 996. That's the new thing, right?
what is
Work
that?
from 9 to 9, 6 days a week.
Jesus, no.
That's
No, no,
what
no.
the tech bros are trying to they're trying to
What?
make it a thing.
Work hard, play hard, no. Make sure there's rest and breaks. Because that rhetoric is sure, like it's a sure way to burn out when there are no guidelines or boundaries. Expect it to be available outside of normal working hours. There was a job that I had where there was no time to do work during the day because there was back-to-back meetings. There was no time during the day to really read my emails, so I was expected, and it wasn't even expected where somebody tells you. It's more of that unspoken expectation where because during the day you were in meetings, you couldn't get work done, you're doing work after work. And then you're reading emails at 8, 9, 10 p.m.
I was just about to
And
ask you, when did you do those things?
8, 9, 10 p.m. What WTF? And so when you're expected to be available outside of normal working hours, that's also a thing that's going to affect your boundary or your ability to kind of separate work from home, work from yourself, and can very well lead to burnout. No one can speak freely in the workplace, so we're talking about psychological safety. And that is more of that fear-based aspect that can lead to burnout, right? Again, remember, burnout is a prolonged state of stress, of tiredness, of hypervigilance. So if you're in an environment for a long time where you don't feel like you can speak freely, your thoughts, opinions at work about that, or again, you're bringing in your human self where something happens in your life, work doesn't care, that's not being able to speak freely. And that's not to say, special treatment for everyone, but there should be flexibility, right? Where if you have employers who don't care about that, and you're like, I can't tell my employer that my child has this or that my family member has this. And if you're having to do that big of a compartmentalizing your individual life and your individual self for your employer, chances are you're going to burn out down the line because you're not necessarily meeting your own needs. Lack of understanding or interest in diversity of any variety. I think I'm gonna leave the explanation of this one for a future episode because it's very interesting with our current administration to think about diversity. It's almost illegal to think about diversity, but those kind of workplace conditions and organizational cultures are not very conducive to a healthy work environment. And how this plays out or how it looks like in real life, burnout modernity. This is normalized, is expected. It's almost like you're conditioned for these things, kind of like Pavlov. If you're not familiar with the dog experiment and social conditioning, it happens so much that you're unaware that you're trained to do the thing, right? So in the Pavlov experiment, they paired, for anyone who doesn't remember this from college, they paired a bell with a dog getting fed. And so every time that the dog got fed, he would start salivating. And so because the bell got paired with the food, he would hear the bell and he would already start salivating. So this is, kind of showing us how we can be socially conditioned for things without our own awareness. There's an episode of The Office where this happens with Dwight Schrute. For anyone who watches The Office, they're playing a prank on him where, actually I'm going to reference the episode because I forgot. I just know there's an episode where they're training Dwight to do something without him being aware of being conditioned for something. But that's what's happening to us, right? So like this burnout modernity, all of this, like I said, is almost like an expectation. If you're not doing it, you're doing it wrong. And so like now this is becoming the norm. So it's, become particularly acute in modern life due to a lot of interconnected features of how we work and live today. The always on culture, acceleration and efficiency obsession, right? Perfectionism, compliance to the point of nothing can go wrong, capitalism, modernity prizes speed, productivity, optimization. Every moment should be productive, every process streamlined, every inefficiency eliminated. This creates relentless pressure and leaves no room for the natural rhythms of human energy and creativity. I have a very interesting research study that I recall from a class that I'll pull up for a future episode where we look at the organization as an ecosystem, right? Because that's when we're talking about the natural rhythms of human energy. A capitalist system does not look at that. We need to look at organizations, companies as natural ebbing and flowing systems. Otherwise, we're not robots, and that is going to lead to burnout.
Absolutely.
Individualization of problems. So modern culture tends to frame burnout as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue. We're told to practice self-care, be more resilient, manage our time better, placing responsibility on individuals to adapt to unsustainable systems rather than changing those systems. That's a big one. And I would love to hear from anyone listening, and maybe from you, Farah, the amount of time that we went to our therapist to talk about workplace things, right?
And not, I mean, most of the times,
Mhm.
to be
There
honest.
was there was a lot of times, and I feel that as much as my therapist, I don't know what it's like in other states. In California, we have the professions of marriage and family therapist, masters in social workers who then become therapists, and I know more little of the licensed professional clinical counselors. But I'm not sure how many of those specialists are looking at how organizations impact the individual, how companies impact the human and the individual, right? I think that's where our specialties and our mastery comes in, because the amount of time that I went to talk to my therapist about what I was experiencing at work, and they try their best to like, oh, did you try and talk to them about like how to manage your workload? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
How did
Yeah.
that go? Not well. They didn't bend. I can't do anything about those deadlines. They're strategic. They're the KPI, blah, blah, blah. So, it's very interesting because, it's individualized. You go get help. You go try to figure it out. You try to get better so that you can fit better into the system. But again, the system is wanting to prime humans for like molding and being robotic, which is not possible.
Not right now, at least.
Yeah. Meaning deficit. What does that mean? So purpose, right? Purposeful work. Many modern jobs feel disconnected from tangible outcomes or genuine purpose. So this we're talking about meaning, purpose, our soul, our passions. When work feels like abstract box checking rather than meaningful contribution, it's harder to sustain motivation and energy. And then finally, the comparison culture. So, social media, you know, we see FOMO and fear of missing out left and right. The comparison culture of connectivity, constantly comparing ourselves to others, highlight reels. You see things and then you start feeling inadequate, you know? I think that's a big one for imposter syndrome is these feelings of inadequacy, but then you have to question where are those feelings coming from and according to who, right? These feelings of inadequacy and the sense that we should be doing more, achieving more, and being more.
That's hustle culture just
Mhm.
ingrained inside of you.
Mhm.
People should relax more. Is it rest is resistance? Is that that's not
Yeah.
rest is
Mhm.
resistance. Take a
Political
chill.
act nowadays. Mhm.
100%. You said something about being able to be able to talk to your supervisor about your child being sick or something, and it made me think about something that happened in a previous workplace where a coworker of mine was asked to go do something in person during COVID, even though she had a child at home that had cancer and was going through chemo.
Mm-mm.
And I'm like, well,
Mm.
that's so many layers of messed up.
Mhm.
I can't even put them together at this point. But it's like you mustered up the courage to be like telling your supervisors, about what's happening at home. And then they still ask you to do something that is extremely unsafe for you and the child. It's just, you really got to be careful out here. And like we said, it's not one size fits all because what this person, communicated with their supervisor about what was going on. And the supervisor was still like, I don't see you as a person. Yeah,
The outcome and the bottom line matters more than you.
right.
Mhm.
These clients, they matter more, right?
Yeah.
So some other patterns that you guys can look for would be punitive leadership, when a mistake is made, are you met with blame? Is, everybody playing the blame game? No, it was content's fault. No, it was marketing's fault. you
Mhm.
know what I mean? Are you getting demoted because you said something? Are you getting isolated because you said something? You know, that's
Mhm.
punitive leadership. Also, did you get laid off because you said something? Idea suppression is another pattern to look for. So, once again, are you being criticized for things that you're saying? Are your ideas being diminished in the quarterly meetings? Get the courage to say something because I acknowledge that it's not easy for everyone to speak up in these meetings, right? So, you muster up this courage to say something, and it's immediately like, "Huh, okay, thanks for your thought." Oh, you don't even get a thanks for your thought. You just get a, huh, and move
Mhm.
on. Like,
Oof.
that is.
Worse.
Yeah, that hits home.
Totally.
Yeah. Or it could be something as simple as like suggesting a happy hour because I know people who are in the office culture are into that thing. And someone's like, no, we don't need any company. Let's have a pizza party instead. That I feel like still counts as idea suppression. Chronic overwork without diet. So they're just giving you all the projects. They're not asking you about your workload. They're not respecting that you have personal time. I feel like this happens a lot with single people in the workplace, for sure, for sure. Talking to
Mhm.
someone who is single in a corporate space, um, they assume that you don't have a life because you don't have, I mean, you have a family, but because you don't have a live in partner and children, they feel like they can exploit you a little bit more. So
Yeah,
Um,
and I'll even add, you said assume, I'll say expect. I've worked in spaces where it was like a thing that we knew that person had family, so ask that person because we know that they don't have a family and they'll do it. Like they can't say no because they don't have an excuse, right? So it's so hard for me to say I can't because I'm gonna go rest. I'm gonna go take a nap. I'm gonna go do my own fun. I'm gonna do whatever I want, right? I mean, that's gonna go into the whole have the choice of having a family, right? But I've had very interesting conversations where for people who choose not to have kids or a family are then expected to take more of a load at work because they don't have those additional expectations.
this is so wild to me.
Mhm.
Not only because I've experienced it, because I've seen it happen to other people too in
Mhm.
various industries across the board in different positions. And it's just like people have lives outside of work. People are working so they can have lives outside of work, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
It's just really, a lack of acknowledgement of a
Mhm.
human. It goes back to that.
And then if you say no, you get the negative repercussions. That's why I said it's more of that expectations because I do remember, have observed, have experienced, have likely read, examples where if you draw that line, if you set up that boundary for yourself, you know, where you say no to an additional request, you're saying no to covering a shift, or you're saying no to staying late for a deadline that is likely late because of poor planning and poor coordination, right? Sometimes shit hits a fan and there's things that are outside of the control. I, by lived experience, can share most of the time it was poor planning, poor coordination, poor communication. That leads to things not working out and being late or having to work overtime. And then when you say no to that overtime, you get in trouble. You are seen as resistant. You are not a team player. You are then not passionate for the work. And then, they start to dock you. Someone's taking notes. They start to dock you. They start to put that in your performance improvement. And, those are tallies against you, which is ridiculous,
It
if you
sounds
ask
like
me.
retaliation to me.
Totally. It is
It sounds
retaliation.
it sounds like an issue for the courts.
So many problematic retaliation practices, right? That could be another
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah,
Stay
that
tuned.
should
Yeah.
definitely be an episode because more people need to know about their employee rights because most people don't know at all, which is very bothersome and absolutely on purpose,
Mhm.
which is why they keep us in our little industry silos or subject specific silos or
Yeah.
our media silos. Yeah, but as we both know, chronic overwork is not sustainable for anyone involved.
Not at all. So if these sound familiar, we're just going to remind you that it's not a you problem, despite, bosses, work culture, people telling you, it's you, it's you're weak. I do remember, I had some family members telling me I would often complain about these workplace cultures, and I come from an immigrant family that very much puts the employer needs above our own needs. And when I would share my grievances about this environment, would be told that it's me, that maybe it's just I'm gonna have to get over it, you know? And
In
for a
my
very long
head, I'm sorry, but in my head, when you said like you gotta listen to your manager, I heard you gotta listen to massa. You gotta. I don't know if my ancestors were like.
they did.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it plays out, right? Which it's not right. It's not right. And so, even from a personal level where you're experiencing it and then your family goes in and adds to it, right? Like, oh, maybe it's you're the problem and maybe you keep finding issues with these jobs. But then I went to go study it and got a master's in it and it's like, no, this is definitely not a me problem and it's more of a workplace condition problem. So now we're moving into our next segment, from burnout to thriving. This is what we're all about. And in this particular one, we're going to talk about how to push back, how to draw that line in the sand, how to establish boundaries for yourself when you're experiencing these things. You have learned a little bit about the patterns, you're starting to recognize them. You heard this episode about your body giving you signals about being in a very stressed out mode. Maybe now you're acknowledging, hey, I've actually been feeling like this for several weeks, several months, several years.
Yeah.
Maybe we're helping you acknowledge and realize, holy shit, I think I'm burned out and I didn't know that. I didn't know this is happening to me. What do we do now? How can we push back? How can we equip you to actually have the tools to do something about it?
And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, how can I do that if I'm already stuck in burnout? Create any change or resistance when you're in the situation. And there are a few options, a couple of options. Some of you might not like these options, but they are options that exist in the world. So, um, at this point, if you want to make change, you have to get a little bit comfortable with being uncomfortable because there will be some discomfort in this process because it's change, right? And it's also change in probably a toxic place too. And so I'm curious, Miriam, what are some ways that people can push back on burnout culture?
So, I mean, first off, I think is acknowledging everything that we told you to start off, right? Yourself, your health, and the patterns, and recognizing them. So, that awareness is key. And then after that awareness comes documenting. So, if you really want to make a case for yourself or for your employer, you're going to have to start documenting things. I think for yourself, I think it'll be helpful for you to know I've been feeling like this for weeks, months, a year. And then naming the reasons why. Like what are the things that are leading? Are you constantly working overtime? Do your timesheets show that you're constantly working overtime? Do you have emails that are constantly requesting additional duties, changes, tasks, assignments that are not part of your regular job description? So you want to start actually writing things down for yourself. And then eventually, if you want to have a serious conversation with your employer, with your supervisor, with HR, or enough information for yourself to then feel okay leaving that environment, right? Documenting those patterns are going to be important so that when you inevitably get asked about it, or that you can feel better about it for yourself, you actually have the proof, right? You're not crazy. I, for a second, felt a little bit crazy. And then I would want to vent to my family, and my family would tell me, well, you might just need to suck it up. You might be a little sensitive. And so when you see that and then you start personalizing it, but then when you actually have the documented record of these things happening, right? You say you can more quickly see and easily see that this is not just about, you, but it's actually, hey, this is going to help you advocate with the facts, not just feelings or actual occurrences. So documentation is really important on a personal level or at work. You start up a document, you start up something where you're keeping track of this so
Make
that
sure it's not in your company email address or company Google stuff or company anything because
please.
once they, you know, they might let you go. If they let you go, they're going to knock you out of that system and you will not have access to those documents any.
Yeah. And also remember when you're an employer of a company, they have access to all your work things. That includes email. So for those of you who didn't know, now you know, don't be surprised. They can pull your emails, your company and your employer. I don't know if this is state-based, I'm based in California, but definitely when you're an employer of a company, they have access to your computer. Someone can, remote in and look at your stuff at any point. They can request it. And also, like Farrah mentioned, you want to make sure that you have record of that for yourself if they like pull your laptop or, shut your account. Documenting things is important. Second is to find allies. So, supportive colleague can buffer stress and remind you that you're not alone. That is a huge one. That's validation, that's acknowledgement that you're not alone or crazy. It leads to that sense of community and belonging because it's a shared experience. And also, allies can help hopefully change a culture, right?
Psychosocial safety, which is different from psychological safety.
Third is to set boundaries out loud. So, we are going to keep talking about this. Check out Farrah's really cool burnout reversal kit, where she actually has a list of how to set boundaries and what boundaries to set out loud and to tell people. An example of this is I'm logging off at 6 today so I can recharge for tomorrow. And you want to verbalize that. I've seen some folks put that in their signatures of their email or sometimes auto reply after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock because there is still an environment of expecting folks to be on and responding. And so for folks who want to be a little more courteous about, I'm not going to be on after 5 o'clock, I've actually seen people either put an automatic response through your email saying that I don't respond to emails after 5 o'clock. I'm happy to respond to you tomorrow morning when I'm in the office. Very similar to that out of the office when you're on vacation, but it's more of like, don't expect a response from me after 5 o'clock. And you're kind of giving that communication out so people know, okay, I'm going to hear back tomorrow, instead of you getting in trouble for not responding at 7 o'clock. So speaking those boundaries out loud, naming it makes it harder for others to ignore. And this is where, Farah mentioned earlier that you might get uncomfortable. Change is hard. This is where it can get uncomfortable to stand up to your boss. It might feel like you're standing up to your boss when you say no or when you put a boundary. That might feel very uncomfortable, but I'm going to gently encourage you to do that anyway. Even if you're nervous, even if you have a lot of anxiety, what are they going to say? They're going to fire me, etc., etc. That's information for you. And I would hope that you can still push through it to instill those boundaries for yourself because you're taking care of yourself. And hopefully, being that pebble that, can ripple out in your culture with your colleagues, maybe allies, maybe your boss can actually notice, like, not doing things right. Not all bosses are bad, not all leaders are bad, and sometimes they are missing awareness, and you could be that person that shares that awareness. So here's your encouragement to speak up and set boundaries out loud.
You got this.
Mhm.
So I'm sure you guys are curious, you might try these things and nothing. How does your body feel? What is your body saying? It's going to be my first, thing. Like, do you have a tummy ache? Are you experiencing feels that you've never felt in your body before? Like chronic backaches is typically a physical indicator of burnout, especially in white collar work, mostly because of all the sitting, right? The sitting is kind of indicative of the overworking that you're doing because humans aren't
Mhm.
made to sit like that. But if nothing changes, it might be time to exit and move on, right? Whether that means working at a different organization or, starting your own thing, because the reality is that it's not worth breaking you to your bottom, right? It's not worth killing you because ultimately that happens. Like people have heart attacks from
Mhm.
chronic stress.
Yep.
People have plaque buildup in their bodies, in their arteries from chronic stress and burnout.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow, but sometimes you just gotta leave. And I can
Mhm.
think of times where I should have left.
Mhm.
My body was telling me, "You need to leave, girl. It's time to go."
Mhm.
It's time to go. And then when I didn't listen, my body just kept beating me up even more. So
Mhm.
I'm just trying to share that little knowledge that sometimes it's time to go. You got to
Mhm.
remember, leaving is not giving up.
It's
It's
choosing better.
reclaiming. Exactly. It's
Mhm.
choosing better. It's reclaiming your energy. It's becoming empowered. It's knowing who you are and it's knowing your worth. Like you're better than abuse. And that's what's happening in these toxic workplaces, right? Would you allow your friend or your partner or whatever to treat you the way that your supervisors, your coworkers, whatever workplace bully you have is treating you? And if the answer is no, then yes.
And that's a super hard decision to do, right? That's when it gets really difficult, and that's why a lot of people choose not to, right? Because it's very difficult to uproot. Maybe this could be a career, maybe it was a very hard job to get, maybe it's really good benefits. You know, Obviously we're not promoting to leave right now willy-nilly, unthoughtfully, right? Like big old disclaimer, we're not saying that.
No, have a backup plan.
What we are trying to say is if these things are happening and you've documented and you're recognizing the patterns and you're ready to make that, you know, choosing better for yourself, the answer and the solution might be to leave that organization, to leave that industry, and to choose differently. And that might be hard, but that's why we exist, because we are wanting to create that space for recognizing that burnout and then figuring out, helping you out, supporting you through burnout to thriving, because it's a norm. And we are the Workplace Revolution podcast. We don't want that to be the norm. Humans at work is what should be the norm. So, should we go into our closing now? Any final thoughts for our segment of how to push back, Farah?
I just, want everybody to remember that This is a capitalist society, and we got to remember that your energy is valuable currency, just like the money that you are spending on groceries. 'Cause
And that is something that I would like you to say aloud again, because I don't think that many of us, and I know for sure I didn't see it that way in my
yeah,
20s, and it took me a very long time to see it that way. So maybe just say it again so that our listeners who are hearing it for the first time, this can really sink in.
we must remember that in this capitalist society, that our energy is valuable currency. It is just as valuable, if not more, than the dollar bills. Okay, way more than the dollar bills, the pieces of paper that you're pulling out of your wallet to pay for. But you're more than that. Your energy can carry on
Mhm.
after this. Yeah, Amir can go ahead and wrap it up now.
So to close it off, here's our listener challenge: burnout and boundary experiment. So I want to invite you all to implement one non-negotiable boundary for the next week. So maybe you listen to this episode and now you're seeing the patterns, and maybe you notice that you work all the time after hours. And maybe your challenge is today I'm actually leaving at 5 o'clock when I'm supposed to leave instead of staying an hour to 3 hours extra. Or maybe it's not checking your email after 7 p.m. I know, at least I'm recalling my old self. I was conditioned to always check my phone and always check my email, where I actually had to remove the application so that I can stop myself from checking that email on my phone. And so if that's something that you do for the next 7 days, maybe that's your listener challenge. If you're compulsively checking your email, try not to do that and try to find your own hobbies. There are things to do in life. Saying no to one request. So if you're a yes person, extra requests are always sent to you, or people know that you're the one that's going to say yes. Maybe this one, start practicing and start saying, can somebody else cover that one? I'm already at my max. I already have project A, B, C, D.
I got
And
another one. You can say, thank you for thinking of me for this project. I love telling people to say this. Thank
Mhm,
you for thinking of me for this project. Which of my current projects would you like for me to deprioritize to prioritize this project? And
mhm,
this reframes it for the leader. It's like, oh, wow, yeah, I guess. And it's
mhm,
also letting them know that you are aware of
mhm,
all of the projects that they are giving to you, right?
mhm,
It's also
mhm.
kind of a finessed way to say no.
Totally. Yeah. I was gonna mention that finesse where if you have trouble just saying no, because there's many folks who, I included in the past have had trouble saying no. Saying no to a request, the finessing part is communication, right? You are sharing like, hey, actually this is on my current workload, and what you're asking me to do is an additional task to project A, B, and C. Finessing of deprioritization, that's the leader's job, right? It's the director manager's job is supposed to oversee the big picture, so they're supposed to help you see kind of capacity levels. Now, when you experience those bosses that don't care about your capacity levels, that's when you need to start documenting things, and that's when you need to see it for what it is and information for you to kind of acknowledge what to do. Taking lunch away from your desk is a big one. The amount of times that I went to meetings where people were apologizing for eating their lunch in the meeting because that's the only time that they had to eat, wild. Also, when I first started to implement this boundary for myself, I actually set a block on my calendar. Right? So I lived in an environment where we connected our Microsoft calendars and people would request meetings and look at your calendar for availability. So I actually went in there and blocked off lunch. Guess what my boss used to do? Schedule over it. And so those are signals for you, right?
So crazy.
Mhm. And
I'm
so
processing.
if or working lunches. I mean, have you been in working lunches before? That's
Yes.
that's the excuse where we got to eat, so we're going to do a working lunch. I would argue that your brain needs a break. And Farah can provide the research and evidence for your brain needing a break, for transitions and for nourishment. And then track what happens. How did people respond? How did your boss respond? How did you do? What was your own individual response? Did you feel better? Did you feel more empowered? what internal narratives surface, bad or good, you know? Maybe you're feeling bad about it, you can't say no, you're realizing you're a people pleaser, and we gotta do something about that. Or maybe this is super easy for you and you're fine, and you're just, kind of acknowledging all these other things that folks go through. Maybe you could be that ally that encourages your colleagues who might need a little more support with the boundary building. So what becomes possible when the boundary holds? That's something that we would love to hear. You can hit us up on our socials or on LinkedIn in the group. This is how we kind of spread that change and validation and acknowledgement that burnout is not a thing and that we're going to stand up for it. So please share your comments. We would love to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with your coworker who is also probably on the edge or in the trenches of burnout, because these headlines are crazy these days.
Mm-hmm.
Truly, just sometimes knowing that it's not their fault and that they're not alone in this can really change everything. Because the individualism in our society is on purpose, right?
Oof, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
make me feel like I'm preaching every time you do that.
Because you are. And the people need to know. It hits, man, and I'm sure it's gonna hit with others. Yeah.
What's the purpose? We hope so, right? You're not alone. It's definitely not your fault. They're just
Mm-hmm.
making you feel like you're alone on purpose.
Personalizing it, that's a modern day problem. For sure. And don't forget, follow Burnout Meets Thriving and leave us a review. It helps more people find this conversation. Join us on LinkedIn. We do have a specific Burnout Meets Thriving group where we engage with community on a more personal level. Leave a post or two on our group page and make sure to follow us. As we mentioned, we are on thrivinghuman.life, and Farah, your website is
Burnoutsupportsociety.com.
So make sure to follow us there as well. And holler. We want to hear from you. I wanna see how this resonates.
Yeah, this is a community effort issue for
Mhm.
sure. And also, if you're knee deep in the burnout culture and you want some resources to help you find a way out of it or a way to manage it, you can find my downloadable workbook at Etsy. Just search for Burnout Support Society or at Burnout SSS. Next week, I'm going to be shifting gears and discussing.
Until then, protect your energy, speak your truth, and remember that the revolution starts with you.
You.